All right. Hello, thank you so much for being here and welcome. I'm excited to introduce you guys to our panel for today, and this is going to be the last of our career exploration series for the fall, so I really appreciate you all joining. I am excited that we have some really great panelists to talk to you about data science and kind of help understand a lot of the ins and outs of the career and what the options can be. I want to cover just a couple of housekeeping things first. This is a webinar, so you guys aren't going to have the option to unmute yourselves, but we do really want this to be driven by your questions. So please think about questions for the panelists and put them in the Q&A. We prefer that you use the Q&A rather than the chat, so we'll be looking there. And we'll start out with introductions from our panelists, so you'll have a little time to think of those questions, but go ahead and put them in as they come to you. And we really will use your questions throughout. Let us know if you have any issues either with accessing the captions or audio and video. You can let me know that in the chat. This is being recorded, so it will be available later. I know that's a common question. And beyond that, thank you all for being here. And I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Phil Ryan, who's going to moderate for today.
Great, thanks, Laura. Welcome, everyone. I did put in the chat our speakers' names and their job titles. I think we're just going to start by having them introduce themselves and tell a little bit about what they do. And then you all can put your questions into the Q&A box. If you put them in the chat, likely going to miss them, but we'll also probably put a little note in there that says, remember to put your question in the Q&A. So we'll try to do this along. To our panelists, you guys can actually pull up the Q&A. So if there's a question that's specifically to you and somebody else is addressing somebody else and you want to answer it, you can actually type an answer in there as well through the Q&A box. All right, then with that, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll go just with the order that we have here, and I will have Samir go ahead and introduce himself first.
Sure, thank you, Phil. Welcome everybody, and I'm very happy to be here. So, as my title says in the chat box, I'm a principal investigator at the National Library of Medicine. I've been at the NIH for 20 plus years now, and I began as a staff scientist working on image retrieval. So my background is in computer science. I have a PhD in computer science looking at aspects of pattern recognition, machine learning, and AI before it became very popular within the past 6 to 8 years. And looking at aspects of how patterns in images, i.e. data, could be indicative of not only disease, but could be used as discussants as material for researchers to look at how the patterns were spreading across a population for a particular disease and how you could query these images for information analysis. I became a principal investigator when the opportunity presented itself, and I have a lab with my own postdocs now, and so on. So data and data science is very broadly defined in my space, which includes images, patient records, some degree of text analysis, although it is of the nature but it's more tabulated toward detecting disease, and also in the aspects of how machine learning design is impacted and outcomes are impacted by data itself, how data sets could skew the outcomes in one direction, how biases can creep in, how noise impacts the prediction quality, and so on. I'll stop there, and maybe I will pick up on these topics later in the Q&A.
Thank you, Samir. Andrea?
Hi, my name is Andrea Hobby. I guess I started my career working as a research coordinator at UCLA from California. Graduated from Wellesley College, and I was interested in research for a long time. And then I stumbled upon this research project at UCLA where they're using machine learning to predict which tumor will respond to which drug the lab I was working in, which I thought was kind of cool, but I didn't have any data science experience at that time. So I went back to school to study cancer epidemiology, and I got a certificate in data science from Georgetown. And afterwards, I did a fellowship, the ORISE fellowship at the FDA in data science and data visualization. And now I currently work at Accenture as a data scientist, where I work mainly with public health projects. So it could be like helping like a state government with their COVID responses, kind of analyzing data from that, or predicting how much testing will be needed, or working with the federal government they have a bunch of different health programs that they need data scientists and data analysts for. What else should I say? I think that's overview, and I can pick up on some of the other questions at the Q&A.
Thank you, Andrea. Peter.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for being here. Excited to be here. I started in the data science field by going back to grad school at George Washington University, got a degree in data science, and started my career actually as a data engineer at Accenture, then transitioned more to a data scientist analyst role within Accenture, and now I'm working at Vanguard the past few months. A lot of what I do isn't strictly really machine learning more than it is data mining, using Python, SQL, finding patterns in our historical data, and defining kind of problems or metrics with leadership for what's kind of important to solve certain business problems, or seeing historically what's going on with client data. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Peter. And last but not least, Angela.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this group. So my background it's kind of diverse. It went from bioinformatics as my bachelor, but then I work at the company and I realized and I transferred into marketing department. That's where I realized the data science is so powerful. So I decided to go back to school for data science related degree, and I got a master in bioinformatics. And then after that, I joined the lab as a programmer at WashU. That's where I do most of bioinformatics stuff. But I was, searching for data that I'm really interested in. So I decided to transition from the more biological, molecular type of biology to public health. So now I'm at the Kansas Health Institute doing more public health projects with the clients. Maybe similar to Andrea, we're also working with a lot of state agencies and local health departments. Yeah, in my role now as data analyst, I think recently I just came to realize a lot of times I'm actually explaining data to the client and more communication side of the work. That's where my focus is right now. And we also do descriptive analysis, but we're trying to transition from descriptive to more modeling and predictive modeling. Yeah.
Great. Well, the first two questions that came in are somewhat related when looking at the educational requirements that you need to do data science or for careers in data science. And I know when we use this term careers in data science, I mean, it's a very big umbrella. But maybe each one of you could talk about why you chose the educational level that you did to have the career that you're having. And I know that we kind of have a broad spectrum of different educational backgrounds here, but perhaps you could each just touch a little bit on why did you choose the degree you did to get to the position that you're in now, and what that means versus the education versus experience when it comes to using your skills. So whoever wants to take that one first.
Well, let's go in the same order. At least it'll be an easier pattern to follow each time. So as I said, I have a PhD in computer science. I was driven toward research during my bachelor's days. I had the opportunity. I was in India for my bachelor's degree in computer science and engineering. And during my junior year, we were required to do in my junior and senior years to do projects that had a practical application in industry. That was the usual trend. And the way I had the good fortune of being mentored by a professor from a leading university who had started his own company. And I was driven towards computer graphics in those days. The idea and I was nurtured into the idea of what are the challenges in creating reality. So a lot of graphics that you see today regarding real looking imagery was something I was dealing with regarding architecture images, that you believe it or not, concrete and brick faces and so on, because that's what his firm was working on. But it got me into reading a lot of literature, research literature in the topic, and I began drawn toward the idea of unsolved problems in the field, which led me to the next phase where if you have a collection of images or media matter, how do you retrieve them other than just tags on them? And what if you didn't have a tag? What if you do not know what it looks like? You can think what it looks like, but you don't know how to ask for it from a machine. So how do you really match visual patterns? And that's what was my basic drive into going to grad school. And I went actually directly into a PhD program in the US at Penn State. And I was looking at a variety of imagery from document images containing index scripts, video containing patterns, and so on. So that was my background. So I was already in research looking at pictures, but I was not looking at medical images. And I came to National Library of Medicine as a postdoc and pivoted on what are the challenges that pertain to medical imagery, which are distinct from these other real, non-medical image pictures. And so the drive behind really getting into why data science, it was the drive to solve a problem that pertained to the use of data, and then getting almost sucked into it because I had the desire to solve problems. That was the driving force. I think I'll stop there.
I think I'm next. So I was working basically in a cancer immunotherapy lab at UCLA, and at this point I decided I need to go back to school. So I decided to do a master's in epidemiology versus a master's in data science, because I was more interested in cancer research and epidemiology at the time than data science. So that's why I went for that degree and just did a certificate in data science instead. I think before I did my certificate in data science, I did do like a self-taught Python course, just so I would be prepared for my certificate program. And I did like a self-taught SQL course. But I don't think you necessarily need to have a master's in data science to be a competitive candidate, but it doesn't hurt to have one. I know Georgia Tech has like a good online master's in, I think, analytics program that a lot of people do. And then I guess also for as educational consideration, it's good to consider what kind of data scientist do you want to be? Because I think there's some data scientists that really require you to have a PhD. Like if you want to work, I don't know, like doing a more research focused data science or machine learning role, you definitely want a PhD. But there's some roles that you don't even need like a master's degree, or so I guess this is something to think about. What kind of data scientist do you want to be? And I think that's all I have.
Yeah, I think I'm next. I got a graduate degree in data science because I was kind of making a career switch. So that's the biggest reason why I did that. I agree with Andrea 100%. There are more and more, like I'm seeing like machine learning engineered roles, or like if you're doing AI, like you'll probably need a PhD for those kinds of roles. And like Andrea said, for more research focus, I could see a PhD being required. I think like more generalist data science roles, I do not think you need a PhD for that if that's really what you're going for. And then there are a lot of like tangential, like analyst, even data engineer roles where I don't think you need, I mean, if you have the work experience or the bachelor's that's related, I don't know that you need a master's. That's going to depend a lot on each company though. I think if you have a sense of what role you're looking for, I think you can tailor your education experience to that role. Also, you can think about just getting your foot in the door at a company, and then working within different roles at that company. If you prove to be like a good worker, people are very open to growing your own career within a company, I would say.
I think you all make really good points. I don't know what else to add. Um, I am similar to Peter. I was, making my career change too. So that's why I was debating like data science or, bioinformatics or something that's related to data science, but also that can incorporate my background education. Yeah, and that's the reason why I chose bioinformatics. Yeah, and I think a lot of time, like I am still also trying to figure out the data analyst role versus data scientist role. I think a lot of times they require PhD degree for research and algorithm development. So I think that's different skill sets.
Yeah, I think if I may just jump in and come back, I think everybody touched on this key idea of decoupling the degree with what the tools you need for the job that you're trying to do. And the degree does help, particularly if you're going into the science of data science. You're trying to develop new networks or new frameworks or new techniques or new methods of looking at data, recognizing that the tools you have are not sufficient and you're trying to find an answer to that. Surely the degree will give you the framework for trying to tackle that problem. But data science as a career is a broad spectrum, and you can be at the applicative end of the data science field and not need an advanced degree like a PhD. Even a bachelor's degree with added skills, or a master's degree preferably would go you a long way. But the more you start creeping into the science of data science, you would find the need to either enrich yourself with the materials without getting a degree, or preferably getting a degree.
I mean, that was a great explanation of the difference that you would need a PhD for and not. I thought it was very well articulated, and I'm going to steal it and hope to credit you when I use it later. I think I'm going to just jump around here on some of these questions, because this one I think follows up well with what Peter had said, that if you prove yourself a good worker, you can grow within a company. So what are a few tangible and intangible attributes of a successful data scientist / data analyst, right? So Samir, I think, is deferring to Peter, since maybe he got...
Yeah, I think so. I'll defer to Peter on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think intangible, wow, that to me, I'm thinking of soft skills. Are you easy to work with? Are you a quick learner? Can you show a general competency around learning hard skills that are related to data science? Are you good at project management, setting deadlines, being organized? I think those are all intangible qualities that are really important, especially in the corporate world, I would say, when you're working on pretty hard deadlines a lot of the time, and you're working with non-technical people who don't really understand why some things take longer than others, and kind of adjusting expectations is really important. I think all those things are really important. Yeah, those are the first things that jump to my mind. I don't know if Angela or Andrea, you have anything to add there?
I guess I could add, I guess for me, what's been helpful is being able to learn on the job. Sometimes you're faced with a new business problem, like you're working with a big government agency and they have a problem they've never seen before, and you have to help them try to solve it. So and there might not be it's not a playbook on how to solve it. So you just kind of have to learn to understand their business and operations and like how to fix the problem like on the job. And there's not always some book that you can read to solve the problem. So
Yeah, just so I think in my current organization right now, not a lot of people understand data science, and I think it's important for us as a data analyst or scientist to communicate our method to people who don't really understand or have different ideas. I think that can also add some value to the projects.
Samir, did you have anything to add?
Not really. I think Peter touched upon the notion. The intangible ones are clearly being able to work in teams and collaborating, because and recognizing that you probably don't have the complete picture of the problem to begin with. You have a sliver or a view into what the larger problem is, which perhaps either the senior managers know, or in my case, the investigator kind of thinks that has a view of the forest, and you're probably trying to climb a tree or a group of trees, if we use that analogy. But the tangible ones, of course, are clearly the skills needed to really tackle the problem. You have to have the quiver in your the arrows in your quiver to be able to solve that problem, and which means that you got to have the framework that helps you solve that problem, or communicate why you're not. If you're getting an answer, is the answer meaningful? Is the response you're getting, the technique, actually valid? And notion of what is valid gets you into trouble sometimes, and on the other time, if you can recognize that something is wrong, it can lead to newer solutions. So this is one of those things where the ability to recognize the problem of a set of solutions, apply them, and then communicate them is the entire spectrum that you need to have some degree of mastery over.
Great. Samir, I see that you marked that you wanted to answer this question about.
That was accidental. I wanted to actually to type it in. Sorry.
Well, go for it right now. Go ahead and if you want to.
So the question is, many data science jobs listed for NIH require PhD. How do I find these jobs that do not require a higher degree? And I think, okay, so here my experience from within the outward is that the kinds of positions that don't require a degree would tend to be in the corporate world, and not necessarily in an organization like NIH, although NIH does have both data science researchers, investigators, or senior managers who are trying to even verbalize what the problem is, or to frame the problem, and then will depend on data science teams to apply solutions for, or develop answers for. But that is given the construct of NIH, where you have both federal employees as well as non-federal employees. The likelihood that these data science jobs that don't require advanced degrees are probably going to be, again, in the companies that we contract through to get the technical skill set to solve these problems. So you're looking, although you may be working at the NIH, working hand in hand with NIH, and when I say NIH, I mean federal investigators or managers. You might be employed by a non-federal entity, and so the likelihood that these jobs would be at NIH is low with the lens that you're putting on. You might have to find, you might end up at the NIH, but working for contracting companies, or working with other groups in the region that are purely what I would say is the non-government world.
Awesome. And I'll say, as somebody who says this to just about every question of how do I find these jobs, start talking to people who have those jobs, right? like, do you want to do informational interviews with Peter and Andrea and Angela? Like, you want to reach out and be like, hey, you did this panel and it was awesome. Can I follow up with you and do an informational interview? And then at the end of that, always ask, who else should I talk to? They have colleagues that they can point you to. They know about jobs opening up in their fields. And you see Peter kind of nodding vigorously here, which I appreciate, Peter. So I'll throw that in as the moderator, and then I want to jump to these two related questions here that are talking about, at least Peter and Angela mentioned making a career change, and that's why they went to get their master's in these various fields. And so one's asking, how long did it take? What were the steps you took? And was it intimidating to apply for these programs if you didn't have a lot of background in the field? And so I'll let you answer those however you would like.
Yeah, I can go. It was intimidating, I will say that. But I think every step of the way, people are very willing to help and offer guidance if you reach out, to Phil's point. For me, I guess, how long did it take? I mean, it was a grad program, so for me, 2 years, but I had several interns, one including at NIH. And those experiences basically led to the next internship and then my first job, which led me to where I am now. So I think for me, it was the graduate program helped me get an internship, which helped me get a job. I don't think you have to follow that path, especially if your bachelor's is technical or related to what you want to do. Again, it was intimidating, but to Phil's point, I do want to reiterate, like, feel free to reach out to me, but also, like, if you have a list of companies you want to work for, look at, like, maybe their LinkedIn, look at data scientists who work there. Feel free to reach out. Like, the worst thing they're going to do is not respond. And if you're polite and professional, I'm sure they're willing to chat or at least answer a quick question. See if you have mutual connections. Also, recruiters, I'm throwing this out there now. Recruiters are very open to talking to you if you reach out and be specific with a question. I think you'll be surprised with how many people are willing to offer advice or guidance as long as you're polite and professional.
My turn now. It was intimidating, I would say. I think Peter really gives really good advice. I'm still, learning from you guys too. Just being the panelist for the seminar, I'm really very surprised and because I think I'm still learning as well. Yeah, so like Peter said, the internship really helps to step your foot in the door, and then making connections are good points. One example that I had was so right after my master's degree, I stayed in academia for a while. But at that time, I was kind of scared to take the step into the industry, although I really wanted to, because that's marketing department is like what drove me to the data science role. But I was kind of intimidated because my degree was in bioinformatics, and I feel like people are not going to hire me in any other field other than biology or life science. So I think I would, if I had the chance to do it again, I would probably really try to step up and really show them that the skill set that I have versus the degree that you have, and don't limit yourself.
So if I can jump in here for a bit, although I didn't technically change my field, I was in computer science. I continued on in some form of data analytics, and recognize that when so this is a little funny. This is me having nearing graduation. My defense is a few months away. I'm looking for jobs, looking for opportunities, undecided. Well, firmly decided I didn't want to go into academia, but undecided as to which part I wanted to go into. I wanted to further research. That was for sure. Would it be corporate research or would it be somewhere else? NIH was not on my radar because I'd never worked with medical images, never considered the challenges that medical images face. That's what my background was. And so when my advisor, who happened to know my previous boss, who and had heard from him that he was looking for postdocs, knocked on my office door at Penn State and said like, Samir, you want to send in your application to National Library of Medicine? And here's me, I'm thinking my either I have done something terribly wrong that my advisor wants to get me out of here because one, Library of Medicine, I'm not a librarian, I have a background in computer science. Why is he pushing me there? And medicine, why I'm not done anything with medicine, why is he pushing me there? So I came here, I interviewed, and I was just fascinated. But was what often where I'm trying to get with this is that sometimes the organizations and their front cover are different from what they actually do behind the scenes. And that was true with NLM. It was looking at opportunities to consider this is 20 years ago, looking at opportunities of collections of images that we are talking about today, and how to index them, how to query them, how to use them for clinical research, and how to consider them for machine learning uses back before machine learning and AI became popular. So often a career change might not be the change that you're thinking, but you again knowing that you are steadfast in what you want to do, and then heading in that, and then picking on and developing a dialogue, talking to people, finding things that are not visible or they're opaque to you, is often goes a long way in what ends up becoming a career change of some kind.
Great, Samir. Andrea, did you have anything you wanted to add on this topic, or?
Not really, but I guess I sort of had a career change, even though I kind of try to stay within the cancer space. A job opportunity came by with COVID because I studied, I was in grad school during spring 2020. So all sorts of different opportunities were coming by at that time. So I kind of pivoted to focusing on it more, advising state governments and local governments. So that ended up being a career change that I didn't plan on. So you never know what might pop up, and just be ready to take on new challenges. So it was a career change, even though I didn't plan on it.
Awesome. I'm going to ask David's question, which has been sitting up here for a while. So thanks for your patience, David. But it says, do data science positions require some form of machine learning tools? And looking forward, is this something that's going to take up more of the field? Is it going to be a larger percentage of field using these machine learning techniques, especially if you're going to be trying to break into the industry? I think David's trying to say, should I learn machine learning? And Samir's nodding.
Short answer is yes. Caveat about learning machine learning is, again, I don't know what David's 5-year plan is. Heading into research that does condition some of my responses, some of this response, but machine learning, analytics, statistics are important parts of the data science field at large. And machine learning increasingly is becoming important because it is one of the tools used for finding patterns which can lead to answers about questions of the data. So knowing how to apply machine learning tools will go a long way as a first step. Second step is going to be, once you've applied it, knowing that the answer is correct or meaningful, because machine learning can lie blatantly in your face, and you will not know that it's lying to you. So it is important to recognize when the responses are believable and are indicative of an underlying pattern that is picked up, or is it just pure noise? And because much of machine learning is data driven, and data can be noisy, and therefore outcomes can be noisy. So looking at 5 years ahead, or looking even beyond, machine learning techniques are constantly evolving. The foundations remain the same, but the way it is applied to data, how data is laid out does matter. And so, yes, one should at least know how to apply machine learning and recognize its pitfalls and successes.
Anybody want to make a counter argument? Or a supporting argument? That's fine in a way.
I guess I think, yeah, the same thing. I guess I maybe focus a little bit more. I guess like for like if you're interviewing for a job, just know 2 to 3 algorithms decently well. I don't think you have to, there's lots of different machine learning algorithms, and I don't think anyone can learn all of them, or maybe someone can, but I think not me. So I just try to focus on 2 to 3 algorithms and know them pretty well for the interviews in case they ask you about it. Because some jobs they want you to be an expert. They want you, but they want you to know enough to use them if needed.
So I think that's a good segue into like 3 related questions that are up here. And it's talking about what's the day-to-day life like. And it's not my favorite term because day-to-day is always different, I think, for everyone. But the follow-up question is like, what % of time are you spending communicating findings versus creating visualizations versus learning new skills, right? And then the follow-up question is, when you're asked to complete a task that maybe you don't have the technical expertise to, like, how do you develop that on the fly, right? And that fits kind of into that learning new skills thing. And so I would bottle all that up with, sounds like you have so much to do. Is there decent balance in your life to have a life outside of work with all of this? So a lot of question in there, but I think it all kind of ties together a little bit. And anybody can start, but I can also just pick someone to answer. All right, Angela, you're smiling.
Oh, well, I said I can jump in, but I was muted too. I think these are great questions because really prompt me to think like, what do I do every day, right? So my organization, we're a nonprofit organization, so a lot of times it really depends on like our time allocated to projects. I think communicating finding versus visualization, to me, they are kind of related because we make visualization to communicate with the clients. And that does take some time because now like we have like static ways of doing this, or we can do interactive map. That's also another thing that we're trying to, like have more attractive ways of reporting our data. So that's probably like the majority of my time, but there are also times that I usually set like 1 or 2 hours aside just for career development, get to know more about what the new techniques are, and also reading some other people's paper and see what the trend is right now.
Peter, you look like you want to jump in here.
Sure, yeah. I think for me, I guess what I'll talk about this week, maybe just to be specific, like I'm working with a lot of user input text data, which is very messy. So lately I've been I'm writing a script in Python to like clean that up and standardize it for a data model that I'm gonna eventually visualize in Tableau. I would say part of that is meeting a lot with leadership, pretty much every step of the way. So I'd say I have a lot of meetings, not even to communicate findings, more than like progress reports and also getting feedback at each stage. Is this aligned with what you were expecting my work to look like? Is this visualization kind of what you were thinking in terms of this business problem? I wouldn't classify that as business findings, but it's still like communicating the work that I'm doing pretty regularly. I think work-life balance is going to depend on a lot, like the team you're on, your management. Are you close to a deadline? Things like that. I think the balance will change probably on a week-to-week basis. It really kind of depends on those sort of factors that I can't fully predict for you right now. But if you have a good manager, they're going to be understanding if you're feeling burnt out and maybe need to take a lighter like week to kind of recover. Also within your company, I'm trying to answer all the questions that were asked. If you don't know or don't have the technical expertise for a specific question, I would look within your company or within your connections for people who you think do have experience there. There are a lot of user communities online. I would look into that. Look into similar projects people have done that's open source, seeing how they tackled that. That's where I would probably start if I didn't really know where to start. Sorry, I tried to answer all those questions in one.
Yes, I can answer too. To work-life balance, yeah. Like you said, I think it depends on the project because I think my data science role at the FDA, there was lots of, well, I was in it like 2020, so there was lots of work-life balance because I literally was not going anywhere, and no one wanted to go outside. And then my current role, it's like I work at a consulting company, so it changes. Like my first project was a state government. It was kind of at an insane pace. And then I switched to a different project where I was working regular 40 hours. And then I'm on this other project now that the timing is reasonable. So it really just depends on, even though I'm at the same company, like each project team is different. So work-life balance will vary depending on who your manager is. So you should interview your managers too to make sure they're not running people into the ground. And then let's see, day to day, lots of meetings. I have lots of meetings, and it's mainly like status updates and getting requirements, like figuring out what the client wants for their machine learning model or their dashboard or whatever you're developing for the client, and just having regular meetings with them to make sure you're on track and they're getting what they want. And then for learning new things, at least for my company, they pay for lots of upskilling. So if you want to learn like anything, like how to use the cloud, or there's a new machine learning model you want to learn, there's just lots of online courses through my company, but there's lots of, for people that aren't working like at Accenture, like there's lots of free courses like on YouTube where you can learn on different machine learning models or how to improve your SQL or Python or R skills. So I just will carve out maybe like an hour every day, like after work, to work on something, just so I can keep learning and upskilling. And there's time to do everything, but hopefully you're on a good project so you have time to do it outside of work.
So my response is going to be slightly different from all three of my colleagues, because I'm an investigator, so I have some degree of independence in what I do. So my advice I'll go backwards from a work perspective, is develop the ability to establish a schedule. That's what will give you your work-life balance. I'm assuming that you have the degree of independence needed. What Peter said about, having a team, and then and what others have said about, Angela said, and about deadlines, or what Andrea said about, working on different kind of goals. All of these matter, but finding a schedule to do your work is important, and then divvying up. So in my case, I have many roles to my investigator title. I'm part of several committees within the NIH and beyond. I am, of course, an investigator, so I'm looking at innovative research topics within the machine learning AI space, and how data impacts AI is one of the things I'm looking at. I have collaborative projects with the NCI and Heart, Lung, Blood Institute and NIID. So those are live projects. I, of course, have mentoring duties along with my postdocs. And I would also like to grow personally in a given area. So it is imperative that I establish a schedule, try and stick to it, recognizing that paper deadlines, in my case, are the ones that will usually suck up all the oxygen out of the room and just demand my attention. And that's fine. You know that these will happen. But on the grander scale, because there's a schedule, and because I devote certain times and certain days to certain activities, leaving time for myself to grow intellectually as an individual and personally, because I'm trying to reflect on things. I'm going to read material outside my space. That's the only way I can grow into doing research. So that would be key. So establishing a schedule, sticking to it as far as possible, and then giving yourself the to do what is necessary for your job, and a little bit outside. So it's a refresher intellectually as well as non-intellectually. So just having fun basically, and it's important. Exercise is good too.
Fantastic. So I see, again, kind of two related questions here. That's talking about data science jobs that require a PhD, and even maybe those who don't, and what it means for a related field. And I think the question that they're getting at is can I have an undergraduate degree in the sciences, or can I have a PhD in the more life sciences, basic science things, with the data science skills and make the transition, right? So instead of getting a degree in data science, can I take my degree that I already have in molecular biology, neuroscience, whatever, learn the data science skills, and then have a career in data science?
Does somebody want to take this on? I think I tried to answer the first one already previously, but
and if it's just a hard question to answer, and the answer is, well, it depends, that's
yeah,
okay too.
The best answer, it depends, but to be honest, I've come to a point in my career where I can say it doesn't matter. If your PhD is not in data science, like bioinformatics, computer science, or data science, and can you do data science? Yes, you can. It just requires you to acquire. If you have a PhD already, you already have some fundamental skills already there. Unless your PhD was in literature, it probably is a little bit more challenging, because you got to get your math and statistics ironed out, and some computing skills ironed out. But in general, those are skills. Again, I go back to disambiguating or decoupling skills from your ability to solve a problem. And the slope could be a little bit steeper, but if you got a PhD, you have handled that steep slope already in the past. So that's my take on that second question. And I guess that's the answer to the third question as well. A related field is one that has the maximum number of overlap, maximum amount of with the analytical aspects of data science, statistics, machine learning, managing data sets, no matter what, you're dealing with data. So
Peter, Angela, anything you want to add to that? Andrea, assuming you're still with us.
Yeah, I think to go off on that, I think the best answer is it depends, but I also want to lean towards yes. If you can speak to working with, for example, big data sets and how you manage that, and if you had coding experience along that way, if you did any kind of statistical modeling in your PhD, you can speak to all of those things in the interview process. I think you certainly can get a job that requires a PhD if you have a PhD in a different field. I do think that. I'm trying to look at the other questions. I think that kind of applies to the second question I'm seeing. If you have some coding experience along the way of your science degree, or some sort of statistical modeling that you can speak to, I think that is valid. And if you can speak to that in the interview process, I don't see why you wouldn't be a good candidate for a job, an analytics job.
Yeah, I agree with Peter. I was very surprised when I was working at the medical school at WashU. There's a lot of PhD students are they're getting degrees in genetics, but they're really good at coding. And I'm like, whoa, you can actually go into data science, right? Yeah, so I think depends, as long as you can show that you have the skill set that, you know, the position that you're applying is asking, then yeah, and it also depends on the interviewer too, if they're really, you know, strict about the degree that you have to have, then yeah, then that will be a different story. But yeah, in general, I think the capability is, to me personally, I think is more important.
Great. Well, kind of winding down on time. So I'm gonna use kind of a wrap-up question here and give each of you an opportunity to kind of answer it. And that's if you could just give one piece of advice, just one, to somebody who's getting ready to start in this field or looking to transition into the field. What's your one best piece of advice to someone starting in a data science career? And whoever has that advice first gets to go first. All right, Andrea.
Be persistent, because, you know, you have to interview for a lot of roles before you'll get your first one. So just don't give up and just keep learning and try to learn. If you have like a current role, to try to incorporate data science into it until you can find the role you're looking for.
I'll go with, I'll try to make it one. It is, the sentence is, it's the army you have. You're trying to think of it as you're trying to go into a field, whether a physical field or a data science as a career field. You have a set of skills. Knowing what you know is important. And then if it means a starter point, career point in that with what you have, start with that, be resilient, and then keep learning. Yes.
I'll go next. I think as a data analyst, I think we talk about a lot of skill sets. And I also think that since we have these, you know, methods to solve problems, but a lot of times we kind of have to have really good communication skills with people who have content knowledge. Yeah, that's what always constant learning, not only the techniques, but also the area that you're doing the data is in.
Yeah, I'll say, I think generally speaking, stay curious and follow your curiosity. That's gonna guide you in the role you take, in the work you do. I would also say don't be afraid to reach out. I think people are really more willing to help than even you think they are.
I think those are all great bits of advice. And I think Peter's last point, reach out, because people are more willing to help. So let me kind of then turn that back on you. If the people want to reach out to you, if the attendees want to make contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that? Is it through LinkedIn? Is it to email you directly?
As for me, it's LinkedIn. So it's Andrea Hobby, like my, you can see. Yeah.
Yeah, same for me. Peter Riley on LinkedIn.
Same.
Just Google me, you'll find me.
Awesome. Well, to all of our panelists, thank you very much. It's been really informative. To our attendees, thank you for coming. Thank you to our captioner as well. And we'll just end a few minutes early, I think, because I think you guys did a great job. But to the attendees, follow up. Honestly, the best information you're going to get is from informational interviews, where you get to talk to people who are doing the actual jobs that you're considering doing. So learn to network, learn those informational interviews, and obviously get on LinkedIn, because Peter, Angela, and Andrea are all waiting for you. And then you can Google Samir. Awesome.
Oh, LinkedIn as well. If you Google me, you'll find me on my LinkedIn as well. So I might say this was a more generic response, but I'm all over the place.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone.